Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to another League of Legends guide video. And in today's guide, we're going to be looking over Swain. So within this guide video, I'm going to show you all the builds, the runes, and abilities of Swain. I'm going to show you how you can play Swain, what he's played like in the early, mid, and late game, how to play this champion, and what's so good about this champion. This champion is played on top lane and is really good at snowballing, and I think he's probably one of the best top lane mage snowballing champions out there at the moment, especially after his rework when he was too basic before his rework. And if you don't know, or if you're new to League of Legends, Swain actually was different beforehand, before his rework came out, and it wasn't too long ago. It only came out like only a few months ago, or maybe, yeah, I think it was a couple of seasons ago, one season ago. Well, that's what you call putting my research down the drain, because that's one thing I don't know about. So we're gonna start off with Swain's abilities, and before we do that, the reason I read the abilities as they are is to show that nothing has been changed about the champion, and it will be read and also gone over with analysis on top of it, just so you know that I'm not just reading it for the heck of it. So firstly, we'll be starting off with Swain's passive, which is Ravenous Flock. Swain's Raven collects soul fragments that heal him. Swain can right-click and immobilize enemy champions to pull them closer, dealing magic damage, and rips out a soul fragment from them. And now you're gonna begin to understand this more when we go into more of the abilities, so I'll go more in depth with that after I explain all the abilities. So we're gonna go to his Q, which is Death's Hand. Swain unleashes several bolts of eldritch power that pierces through the targets that have been killed. Enemies take more damage for each bolt they are struck by. So this ability is mostly used for wave clear, as the minions are really low and they are enough health for being last hit. If you do it with your Q, it actually shockwaves behind them, and it actually allows you to hit the minions from behind. Or you can use it to put your enemy off guard, because you can use the first minions to use your Q extension, and then you can hit the back of the enemies, and they're not going to expect it. They're going to be like, what? Something just hit me, and it's going to be the Swain Q that goes through the minions. So you can use that to keep them off guard. Then we'll look at Swain's W, which is Vision of Empire. Swain opens a demon eye that deals damage and slows enemies. Champions hit are revealed and also grants Swain a soul fragment. Now the only thing about this ability that's kind of a disadvantage is the fact that it takes so long to pop off, because this ability can be cast in a wide amount of range, and it takes a few seconds for the ability to actually pop and do damage. But the good thing is it gives you a soul fragment, damages the enemy, and slows them, so you can use this to mess up the pathing of the enemy champion. You can make them go elsewhere, or you can use it to bait them into an enemy, because either way, as long as they're getting hit by this ability and Swain gets souls, Swain heals a lot from it. So you have to make them think that they have no other choice to either hit that or to move into a worse place than they should do. Then we'll look at Swain's E, which is Nevermore. Swain launches a wave of demonic power forward. It then returns to Swain and roots enemies it hits. Now this ability is mostly going to work with your passive, and this is what roots your enemies. And once your enemies are rooted, you'll have an arrow indicated towards the enemy, so you can use your passive. So when you right click someone that's CC'd, you can pull them. Now this doesn't only work with Nevermore, this works with every other CC in the game. So if you have an ally that CC'd the enemy and your passive is off cooldown, you can reap the enemy, or you could just pull them, and you get a free soul for it. And the souls are going to be very useful for when it comes to the ultimate, which is what we're moving on to right now, which is Demonic Ascension. And the only way to use this is you need at least one soul, but having 5 souls maximum releases out all of the damage. So Swain frees the demon within for 12 seconds, gaining bonus health. While Demonic Ascension is active, Swain drains the 3 closest visible enemies to him, prioritizing champions, dealing magic damage to them for each second, and healing himself for each enemy hit, reduced by 80% against minions and monsters. Now after Swain receives a certain amount of health, he's able to reproc his ultimate, which allows him to end his ultimate early, but what it does is it releases out a massive shockwave of damage. So the longer that you're hovering around the enemies with your ultimate and you have the chance to reproc it, you can use it to instantly get a kill, or you can use it to continuously heal yourself and use the second part of the ultimate to pop off on every enemy champion. This is why this ability is going to be super good in team fights. And just bear in mind, if Swain does die while channeling the ultimate, he will get it refunded. So in the best case scenario for this, you want to get all of your souls, and in order to do that, you want to use your passive, your W, and then that's going to be empowering your ultimate. So you want to use this as much as you can, and this is going to be amazing for team fights. So that's all the abilities of Swain. You want to pretty much use the rest of your abilities to empower your ultimate. Gathering the souls is not that hard. All you need to do is just proc the passive, which basically is right-clicking the enemy that is being CC'd. And this works with any CC, as long as it's hard CC. And then once you have enough souls, you can use that for your ultimate. Your E should be combined with your W and your Q. Your Q is mostly used for wave clearing, and it can also be used as your main source of damage, only because when you max this ability is on a small cooldown, a considerably small cooldown whenever it's maxed. So when it comes to maxing, you want to max your Q, E, W, and then max your aura as many times as you want. The reason you want to max your E second is because you want to have that up as many times as you can so you can root the enemy, and that's going to be what helps your jungler to follow up on kills. Whenever they're coming in for a gank, your E and your W is going to be really helpful for when ganking opportunities are coming in. And as long as you land all of these abilities and you have maximum souls, you're able to 2v1 in the lane whenever you're getting lane ganked on top lane by their jungler and then their laner comes towards you. Sometimes Swain has massive snowball potential. Well, he always does, as long as you have the right things, which is either the items that you need or it's the amount of souls that you have. So it's gonna be, you're gonna have to try and have maximum souls, and it's not that hard to get, and it doesn't take too long to get either. So now we're gonna look over at Swain's runes. Now I got two separate pages for you guys, and the first one is going to be on Sorcery Primary with Inspiration Secondary, going Arcane Comet, Nimbus Cloak, Transcendence, Gathering Storm, and then going Perfect Timing, Cosmic Insight. With the other runes, you can go Adaptive Force twice, and you could go the Health rune, which provides you with health. Now, there are a lot of debates for what kind of runes to go, and I say it's down to personal preference or towards the situation that you're in. Now, the reason I go Arcane Comet instead of Phase Rush is because Arcane Comet is actually very rewarding in the form of poking and damage dealing. Phase Rush does also make you run really fast when you're engaging onto the enemy, but once you've used everything, why would a Swain need to run up to the enemy anyways? Unless they're going to use their ultimate, but that's what Nimbus Cloak is for. Nimbus Cloak is for when giving you move speed while you're ulting. This is why I don't go Phase Rush when doing that, because once Swain has used all of his abilities, all he can do whenever he's maxed Q is only spam the Q, but he's going to need the rest of his abilities, which are on massive cooldown, so you gotta be careful about that. But remember, it's all down to personal preference. Then you can go Transcendence so you can get the CDR and build additional CDR so you can get more damage stacked on top. And Gathering Storm instead of Scorch is actually better because it makes Swain more for a late game Snowballer. I think Swain's late game is probably his strongest because his ultimate does a crap ton of damage and leeches off the enemy's health quite a lot. And as long as you're in range with multiple targets with your ultimate, you're always able to reproc it. And Gathering Storm does give you a lot of AP for the late game. So this is going to be used so you can scale towards late game and so you can do a crap ton of damage. And then for Inspiration, you want to go Perfect Timing because his ultimate can be combined with Zhonya's or with Stopwatch, as when Swain is in his ulti form, he can use Zhonya's so he can still leech off the enemy's health and still damage them, and then we can go Cosmic Insight for extra CDR. And then the mini runes are explanatory to why I picked them, but you can always go something different, adaptive towards your situation that you're in. And then for the next rune page, you can go Inspiration Primary and Sorcery Secondary, pretty much the other way around, but you can go Kleptomancy, Perfect Timing, Biscuit Delivery, and Cosmic Insight, with Sorcery going Transcendence and Nimbus Cloak. Now you already know what pretty much Transcendence, Nimbus Cloak, Perfect Timing, and Cosmic Insight is for, but Kleptomancy is to keep the sustain in lane, to give you free items, free wards, free mana, and free damage for when you get elixirs, and Biscuit Delivery will give you health and mana for when it's needed. And then for the mini runes, you can go the CDR rune, and then the Adaptive Force, and then you could go Health. And this has been quite a recent and powerful kind of rune page, and I highly advise you try it, because it's really easy to proc Kleptomancy on Swain. It's not actually really difficult, and Swain does lack mana a lot as well. That's why sometimes you might need to do a corruption pot start as well, and forcing your enemy to back first is really good for you because you're able to push in the waves in and then go back yourself and come back with more gold to spend and to be in time for the next minion. So now that we're done with the runes, we're going to be moving over to Swain's items. Now when it comes to starter items, you can vary this upon if you want some sustain or if you want damage really early in the game. If you want sustain, you want to go Corrupting Pot or Doran's Shield. Otherwise, you can go Dark Seal or Doran's Ring if you want to start off with early damage or if you're considering to buy Medjais for later on. Then for the core starter, you want to go for Catalyst so you can build your Rod of Ages faster. So Rod of Ages is going to be your base item only because that item is a good late game item, especially after 10 stacks, because it provides you with health, mana, and some AP. And then you can go Sorcerer's Shoes because you want to try doing as much damage as you can. Otherwise, you can go Ninja Tabby or Mercury Treads depending if they have all AD or all AP team. And then the other items are explanatory like Fiendish Codex and Blasting Wand and Stopwatch, only because these are either building it into Zhonya's or any other items like Leandry's or anything. So that comes towards the rough selection of items where you build either of the boots that I've told you. You can always go Banshee's Veil only because of the spell shield and a lot of the magic resist and AP that comes up on top lane. So this will be good against someone like Vladimir or any AP top laners. Zhonya's Hourglass is probably going to be one of your core items of the build as well, only because it combines really well with your ultimate. Rabadon's Death Cap is going to be good, especially for the late game. You want to build this as soon as you can. Then you can go Morellonomicon for a lot of the damage, the penetration, penetration and for the grievous wounds infliction. Spirit Visage is going to be really good for when your ultimate healing is applied, because you get 30% more healing from the Spirit Visage passive. Void Staff for extra magic penetration and AP. Rod of Ages for the slow for when you're applying your ultimate and when you're applying your W as well. Luden's Echo can somewhat work. I think this is a pretty decent mid-game item, or a fourth item. Leander's Torment is going to be probably one of your best items as well, especially to have for late game, because this scales really well with your ultimate damage. It's going to really burn the enemy down, and this is going to be really good. And then you can go Magi-Eyes if you have maximum stacks on your Dark Seal, and if you feel really confident and really ahead in the game. And then when it comes to late game, you always want to pick up Elixirs whenever you're at full build, going Oracle if they have a trap top laner like Teemo, always buying control wards as soon as you can, and if anyone else doesn't have blue wards, you can always go blue wards if your mid laner doesn't go it. And then here's an example build for what kind of build a Swain build would look like. This is probably a generic good build that has a lot of health and a bit of armor, along with a bunch of magic penetration and a lot of damage. I think this is going to be really well when Swain uses his ultimate, which revolves around team fights, so it's going to be a good, really good team fight build. And then for summoner spells, if you're going super aggressive, you can go Flash and Ignite, but of course I would prefer to go Flash and Teleport for the map control, so you can TP around the map. But if your mid laner has TP, you can always have the excuse to go Ignite if you feel aggressive about it, or if you feel you'll dominate top lane. Otherwise, if you want to go Unsealed Spellbook, if you want to go both, then you can do that. Just make sure you're always taking Flash as well. You never know. You don't want to go something like Ghosting. Now, I'm going to do a quick summary on what I think about Swain's early, mid, and late game. And there's not much discussion about this, only because it always does change around. But I think Swain is more of a late game champion, only because after building his core items and everything, this is with most champions that are late game as well, like Kassadin. But I think with Swain that he's more of a late game champion, and I think his kit is more revolvable for when it comes towards mid game. So when it comes to early game, Swain is not the strongest and does lack mana very early in the game, which is why you can always debate to go mana flow band, or you can always not spam your abilities to make sure you're not using up any mana, but only spam them when you know that they're gonna hit, and try not to unnecessarily use your abilities as well. Then when it comes towards mid game, Swain actually gets really strong only because when you go for the Q max, you'll have max points in your Q ability, meaning Swain's Q is going to be on a really low cooldown, which is very spammable. So when you're going Corruption Pod, this is actually really helpful, but even so within the early game, he still does lack mana after using it all. So you have to prioritize on how you're going to use your abilities and how much mana you have as well. I think it's really important that you have to be farming with Swain as well, and that's said to be for every champion, but with Swain you actually really need to grind for your core items, or else you're not going to get anywhere, because Swain is really reliant on his items for when it comes to damage and teamfight potential. Swain is going to be stronger than a lot of champions within the mid game as well, but because Swain lacks mobility, you also need to be careful for when it comes to top lane ganks. This can happen towards early in the game as well, and Swain does lack a lot of mobility. His only way of getting out of a situation is using his ultimate to heal him out of there while walking out, unless he has phase rush, but as long as you're having the Nimbus Cloak, this will also help you kind of get out of lane and give you a little bit of mobility. Your E and W is going to be really important for making up setups for your jungler for when they come and gank in, and you need to be warded on top because you want to make sure the enemy jungle isn't always coming for you, because Swain can be very vulnerable in fights unless he's got 2 points in his ultimate or maximum souls. Making sure that you have maximum souls is very important, only because you get the maximum damage that way and the maximum healing. The more souls you have, the more of the better effect you get from your ultimate. And then once your ultimate runs out, you run out of souls, so you got to reset them, and it doesn't take too long as well. And then when it comes to late game, I think Swain is a late game monster. He's a type of champion that could just run into a team while ulting, but also having Zhonya, so not every part of the enemy team is killing you, because no matter what in late game, enemy teams can be really strong. Both teams are going to be really strong, so you have to be very careful. But when you can jump into the enemies and use your ultimate along with your team engaging, as long as you focus the right person and as long as you're chunking off everybody's health for yourself, you're gonna sustain so hard in the fight that they won't be able to kill you. This is why Swain is really good at snowballing, especially in top lane when you're getting ganked by their jungler. Most likely in situations, Swain can 2v5 if he has 5 souls and he has his ultimate on top lane, because a lot of enemies do not expect how much healing Swain gets from when he's leeching health off the enemy champions. So that's one thing to be aware of and one thing to be careful of, especially when you're going against a Swain. Just remember to pick up your items as soon as possible and make sure that you get Rod of Ages first, because that's going to help you in your late game. Once it's stacked fully, it's going to help, especially towards the mid game, because you're likely going to be rushing that first, so you'll have the maximum stacks by mid game. So I'd say Swain is more of a mid and late game champ, and that's just me from personal experience. But if you guys do want to say otherwise, you can go and put that in the comment section below and think to why Swain's other parts of the game are stronger. So now that we've covered Swain mostly, I'm going to be jumping you over to his combos. There's not many huge combos that Swain does have, but he has a few generic combos that you use for 1v1ing or for when you're jumping into team fight. So I'm going to move you over to there, and then we'll summarize up Swain. So now that we're covered his combos, we're going to be looking at the pros and cons of Swain. Now when it comes to the pros, I think that his lane sustain is pretty high. And this is only because of his ultimate and the fact that his W and his passive gives you a lot of health for when you receive souls. Remember, when you're receiving souls, you're not only receiving that soul, you're given back a lot of health. And this is amplified for when you're going Spirit Visage or for when you're pressing ulti. Now these are going to be very useful, and your souls are going to be very important for when you're sustaining. And then you want to prioritize your runes and your corruption pot to give you back your mana as well. I think Swain has awesome vision control because his W can also be used to be seeing what's halfway across the map, because that ability has such a huge range. So when you're top lane on red side, you can always use your W to see the enemy blue side just by pressing W all the way over there. There is a massive range on his W, and that's the reason why it takes a long time to proc as well. His follow-ups to ganks are amazing only because when enemy junglers do have CC in their kit, Swain can use his passive to pull and take their soul along with preparing the W with the pull, so it can slow the enemy as well. So it's not the hardest thing to actually follow up with the jungle gang, considering all you have to do is right click to extra CC them. And his ultimate is perfect for team fights and when it comes to snowballing the enemies. Just make sure you gather the maximum souls so you can actually get the full effect of this ultimate, but if you have to do it with less souls, you can. And that's what makes up for his zoning potential as well. And I think his Q does provide for good wave clear and spam ability for when it comes to maxing it and using it to kill your enemy champions. And when it comes to cons, the burst of the ultimate does not happen instantly. This only happens when you deal just enough amount of damage, and then you can use the burst part of the ultimate. But the best part is the longer you use it, the more damage it's gonna do. But the quicker you use it on the lower health enemies, the quicker they'll die. So it gives them less chance to escape. His mana costs are pretty high, so that's one thing to look out for. One thing I advise here is to put on the spell cost so you can actually keep track of how much it's going to cost and how much mana you're going to lose when you're using abilities. And like I've already said, Swain does lack a lot of mobility. This is why you want to go with the runes that I've told you, so it actually makes up for the mobility. So you don't want to overextend when it comes to your laning phase. You want to keep your vision where it's necessary before you do any of that. Swain is more efficient late game, so you're gonna have to be careful when it comes to early game, and mid game I'd say is pretty much decent for when it comes to Swain's playstyle. Now his E you gotta be careful with. The only thing is sometimes his E can end up hitting a minion when you're trying to hit the enemy champion. Remember, E only hits the furthest target that it reaches to. It always goes to the back target. It will not stop halfway for the enemy champion. It will always hit something in the back. So this is used for when your minions are in front, the enemy minions are in front, and if the enemy champion is at the back. And if that's not good enough, if you can't reach them that way, so if they're standing between the minions, you can use your Q to actually poke. So once your enemy minion is low enough to a last hit auto attack, what you can do is Q the target instead, and the shockwave of the Q will hit the back, which is where the enemy is. If they're in between the minions, you can use your Q to hit the enemy champion. Otherwise, you can use your E to bring them forward, then use the Q to go through the minions and hit the enemy champion. And one last thing is Swain's W does take way too long to proc itself, to do its damage, the burst. This is why you gotta use your E and your W, because your E is gonna hold them in place, and you can use the pull passive to pull them back into the W, so you can make up for a good combo like this, like I showed you before when it came to the combos. But yeah, that should be pretty much every pro or most of the pro and cons for Swain, and if you got any more, go ahead and shove it down in the comment section below. So anyways guys, if you guys enjoyed this video, if you guys enjoyed this guide, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. If you guys want to see more guides like this, then go ahead and put it down in the comment section below. If you guys want to see other champions be featured within this season, because the new seasons come out, I might have to refeature all the other champions that I've done, because they're getting a bunch of changes, and I'm going to bring them forward, and I'm going to redo their guides as well. So anyways guys, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you guys in my next video. Peace guys, and see ya.